My name is Mohammed Mir, and I will be explaining arrays and kind of giving a little crash course on them. So, essentially, the idea is that arrays are big variables that we can set multiple values within. So, the idea of colors there's multiple different colors, and we can set those values within the same variable: red, blue, and green. So, our variable is a string, so we have string variables. We have a string variable, so our values also have to be a string. So array variables follow the same rules as, variables with single values. They could be strings, they could be integers, they can be floats, whatever you may have it. For the sake of this argument, we will be having a string array called colors with the inputs, with the values red, blue, and green as strings. Now, arrays, you can access specific values within the array just by knowing the index. So say I wanted to access the first value, which is red, I would do it at the index 0, because arrays are indexed from 0, 1, 2, and onward. If I wanted to access blue, I do 1, and so you may have it. I can also change these values. Like, say I wanted to change blue to yellow, I could, like so. This would essentially just change the value of blue to yellow. We can manipulate the values that are also already set within the array. Another thing you can do is actually access the length of the array. So if you just needed to know how many values you had within the set variable there's multiple reasons you could do that. You'd just use the length property, so it'd just be colors.length, and this would essentially give you the value that you should get after the value you'd get from having whatever amount of values within your array. So you can also loop through an array. There are multiple reasons to loop through an array, but for the most part, you do it to actually format the actual array and change the way you want it to look. So, for example, say I wanted red, blue, and green to be printed out like horizontally, like right next to each other. I could do slash print next line, slash print next line, slash print next line, whatever. And I could do that a multiple amount of times, but say I had like 40 colors. That's a lot of lines just to print out something in a new line each time. So we could instead do something like a for loop. For int I is equal to 0, and then we'd set I less or greater than the length of our array. So, and then I plus plus, whatever. So this essentially, and then if I just did print ln colors at the ith index, at the I index, essentially, and this is pseudocode. This is obviously not written with proper syntax. This is all just for the sake of the argument and explanation. Essentially, what I'm doing here is I would be printing out these in horizontal order. So there's one example of why you just want to loop through an array. There's multiple other reasons, but again, I think for the most part, it's really just for formatting. So multi-dimensional arrays are something that looks tricky, but they follow the same rules as regular arrays do, so they're pretty simple. So a multi-dimensional array is just an array that contains more than one set of values, more than one list of values, essentially. So say, let's do an integer array. Let's say we have 2 arrays in here, so I would do 2 square brackets to establish that I have 2 arrays. Now say I wanted 3, I do 3 square brackets. Pretty simple. So int, we'll have an array of integers. We'll just call it numbers or num, and we'll set it equal to 2 arrays. So essentially, this is where our first array would be, and this is where our second array would be. And for the sake of the argument, I will fill it out with values. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So we have the multidimensional array of num with two arrays, array 1 here and array 2 here. So the same way you can access elements within a single array, you can do this within a multi-dimensional array. It's pretty simple. Essentially, I would just do num and say I wanted to access the first array and the third element. Arrays are essentially indexed the same way as elements are. So this would be the 0th array, and this would be the first array according to the index. So if I want to get the first one, I'd do the index 0, and if I wanted the third element, I'd do 2. And say I wanted the first one, the second array at the first element, I'd do 1, 0. And that is essentially a short crash course on arrays and how they function and what are some of the functions of them, just essentially what they are and what they can do. But in hindsight, arrays are just a very efficient way to where we can store values within the same head variable. So it's just a very good way of just organizing values and should be used by any software engineer.